Coming at you once again with a game from the vaults, Super Great Friends to be exact. Before I repeat a snippet that I've probably reiterated in the past, I highly recommend that you check out his channel, Oddities Abound and yada yada, which is how I know about this game, but surprisingly enough, it does come from a high-profile director. Another auteur to add to my growing list standing amongst Miyazaki, Suda, and David Cage. What? I didn't say that they were all legends in the positive sense. Like with many a video in the past, instead of starting at day 1 development, I'll shift dice to the beginning with a name, Hidetaka Suhiro, the one and only Swery 65. While compared to his contemporaries, there isn't much I can draw upon due to a relative newness with his eclectic star, his defining title Deadly Premonition, not a directorial debut, not an industry marvel, and certainly not unifying in the traditional sense, accruing the Guinness World Record for most critically polarizing survival horror game. That's not to say that he doesn't have an acute vision for games or that he's a forgettable director. If anything, it speaks volumes about the industry that this man hasn't been documented as much. On record, this might be the first image you have ever seen of Swery. Yeah, that's the kind of person who makes the likes of Twin Peaks the game, but way before his most prominent work would incite discussion amongst players regarding whether it was the shit or just plain shit. Here's hoping that Hotel Barcelona lands for me, unlike No More Heroes 3. We need a breaching point to kick this off, yeah? Mentioned before, Swery's life is shrouded like the wearer of the lightning greaves, but there are a few threads we can follow within this labyrinth. For starters, Swery himself was born to Buddhists, and posited by Brandon Shefled on Game Developer, as a child he dreamed of becoming a monk like Ikkyu-san. As he got older, he forgot that dream and studied film, writing, and theater production and lighting, even as he got a standard monk license in high school. As a son of monks, that wasn't a very difficult thing to do. That's a surprisingly common factor with a number of directors entering the industry off a stint in film or theater, but this is mere observation on my part to pad time and throw out conjectures, as Hideo Kojima of Metal Gear fame and Kazutaka Kodaka of Danganronpa fame winded up trekking on this same path. Akin to Miyazaki, it was the words of a friend that placed Swery on the road to games development. Back to Brandon, in his third year of college, a friend in his film group asked him to join the game industry with him since games were becoming more cinematic. They chose to apply to SNK because it was close to their houses. Swery got in, the friend did not. That was 1996. And for a while, Swery would work as a scenario writer under the likes of Kazuna Encounter and Last Blade 1 and 2, but there was a yearning to be had. Cutting ties with SNK and propping himself up with a designer role for Tomba 2, I would really prefer if you'd be quiet, and planning credit for Extermination, he would form Access Games in 2002 from members he associated with on Whoopi Camp's Last Hurrah. Undertaking his first substantial project as his own man, 2003 would be the year, at least in the Japanese market, that spy fiction saw the light of day, Americans and Europeans receiving it the following year. Ostensibly aping the success of Metal Gear Solid, what lied below spy fiction's misjudged cover was a love letter to the likes of Mission Impossible. Only goofier until it wasn't, a running theme in a number of Swery's works, Deadly Premonition the prime example. In a somewhat bold move post the mild reception and poor sales of spy fiction, back in the SGF hole I go, a characterizing trait for Access Games was to approach development on a Western-first basis. What that means is that from the offset, the script, dialogue, and everything in between would be written, performed, and recorded in English first to be translated back into Japanese later. For an example, Swery himself states in a Polygon interview that I wanted to make Osaka games, Swery says, referring to the studio's hometown. Osaka is in the western part of Japan, so our goal is to make something that's Japanese but can also fit into the western market. In steps Tomio Kanazawa, whose name might lack importance, but he holds special mention for the likes of the localization for Arc Rise Fantasia, Muramasa the Demon Blade, and Little King's Story, alongside producing Ju-on the Grudge on Wii and the DS remake of Flower, Sun, and Rain. Oh, and to keep within the time frame of 2004, Harvest Moon Another Wonderful Life. Fresh off that game and entranced by spy fiction, Kanazawa thought that the person who made this game would have the skills to work on my game. Thus, the title Never Meant to Be Rainy Woods was pitched. To keep this brief, like what I did with Killer 7, I won't go in-depth for Deadly Premonition as it is deserving of its own video. The history alone sinuous and filled with victory, defeat, and a man's self-doubt turned inside out. Many players have their parts, while the likes of Jim Sterling awarding Premonition a 10 out of 10, acting as a catalyst for Swery to acknowledge that he stood by his vision and that the 6 years it took to craft DP weren't wasted. Same can't be said for Dark Dreams Don't Die, D4 not to be confused with D2 or in 2015, but that was a mixture of corporate meddling, frustrations with development, and a health scare. From the top, Access Games and Microsoft worked out a deal for D4 to be an exclusive on the Kinect, which in hindsight isn't as major of a strike compared to these next two, but it did ensure that practically no one would touch D4 outside of the curious. In the words of Seven, the Kinect sucked. To the health dilemma next, announced on Access Games' personal blog, a post from Swery reads, "Starting today, I will be taking a short break from game development in order to focus on recovering from reactive hyperglycemia. I'm already slow enough at making games as it is, and I feel like all I ever do is make my fans wait, but I've decided that I need to take a rest here so that I can hopefully continue to make games in the future." While he would return circa 2016 in bombastic fashion, flaunting his Yakuza-style tattoo for men of game design, it would not be under Access. Swery is once again a free man due to creative differences with his own company. Coincidentally, this sealed the fate of D4, but keeping Swery down for the count is nigh impossible. The director starting up White Owls Incorporated and securing Arc System Works as a publisher for his next project. The Missing. Formerly titled The Missing, J.J. Macfield and the Island of Memories, the indie game would star the eponymous character as she tried to reconvene with her friend and lover after being separated. Along the way, to solve the many puzzles blocking J.J.'s search for her girlfriend Emily, she must regularly mutilate herself. Speaking of that topic, Swery mentions to Destructoid that, "I think the initial impression was this game had a lot of gore and a lot of violence, and in the beginning, people would react with laughter or being taken aback by it. That's bound to happen. I think people will make fun or make jokes about it. You can't really escape that, but what I'm very much looking forward to are the people who actually play the game all the way through and see the purpose of all this and how everything comes together in the end." Time repeating, The Missing 2 would ooze a fondness for the likes of Twin Peaks like its predecessors did, Swery in the interview confirming that he used the same recording technique Lynch used in his series, where actors say the lines in reverse, and then that audio is itself reversed to make it intelligible, but with an otherworldly quality to it. In contrast to D4, The Missing would see release on all major consoles of the time, Swery mentioning that it was important for me to release the game on all platforms at the same time. That was a goal for me and it was a challenge for us. I hope to encourage a lot of other indie game studios and energize the community to see a game release on all platforms from a team of only about 12 people. Around the same time, The Good Life was traversing its ups and downs, failing to find funding on Fig before doing so on Kickstarter, effectively making The Missing a risk-free venture. True to Swery's word, The Missing would see worldwide release on October 11th, 2018 for the major consoles at the time, with the version I played being the PC Steam release. Our tale opens up with J.J. Macfield and her girlfriend Emily hopping in a dinghy for a camping trip on the Island of Memories, a world unto itself as the opening narration describes.
Memoria Island. A remote island in North America, just off the coast of Maine. Filled with artifacts left over from the good old days, this island has the power to awaken the formative memories of all its visitors. The island's ancient inhabitants called it Alapo Grimo, which means place to find the lost in their long-forgotten language.
While the girls seem close, their relationship appears to be on the rocks, with Emily's elopement from the campgrounds making matters worse. Chasing the woman of her dreams, JJ receives a bit of the old divine judgment and smolders to a crisp.
JJ. Hey, JJ. JJ. Emily?
Sharks didn't minister that. Major Hemmerlush. Major Hemmerlush. Major Hemmerlush.
Why?
Tell me that what I hear is true and I am not dreaming. Show me the way that I can find all the answers I'm seeking. Steady, the fire burns my skin, but I cannot feel it. Ready tonight to take the bullet with my name on it. Take me down those old cobbled streets where we used to meet. Maybe that way I can see the sun and the stars again. The sun and the stars again.
Hey, JJ.
Not to her death, mind you, as she gets granted a pseudo-invincibility and healing factor that would make Deadpool proud. Good thing that JJ has these two abilities now as reality begins slipping away. JJ's plushie FK, not Forrest Kaysen, begins shooting her texts alongside older messages from Emily, her mom, and college associates now showing up in her phone, Emily increasingly adding to her odd behavior, a strange deer-headed man spouting medical terms at JJ, and a wrathful monster, the Hair Shrieker, dicing her up when it gets the chance.
Emily, where are you? need to hurry.
The closer our girl gets to the center of the island, the clock tower where JJ and Emily shared a promise, the more unhinged the world becomes. Amongst the texts we see, we uncover a dark truth to JJ's life that is hinted to us by the college contacts when Professor Goodman acknowledges that JJ is the target of bullying, possibly because a friend by the name of Lily unwittingly spread rumors that JJ suffers a condition from a book she borrowed from the library, but is stated outright by Emily and JJ's mom. Biologically, JJ is a guy, but she identifies as a trans woman.
Emily, hold on.
Hey, JJ, I have rearranged now. I feel a lot lighter.
I'll be right there. Just wait for me. Okay, Emily?
Glad of things. Glad of things.
I need to hurry.
Pushed to the edge and feeling trapped by despair, the real-world JJ attempted suicide. In action, Island Emily mirrors as JJ's psyche has separated itself from reality by placing Emily in JJ's position. At her wit's end, Island JJ hangs herself as well, but by a rousing speech from FK and Emily does JJ accept the pain and decides to move forward, spurned on by her personal relationships providing her the strength to kill the hair shrieker. Our story ends with real-world JJ reviving the deer-headed doctor, the EMT who staunched her blood loss with FK, and reuniting with a distraught Emily who's happy that her friend survived. Same goes for JJ's mom, who calls her trans daughter to make sure she's alive. The core of The Missing is a play about identity, an ongoing struggle that we as a society have to deal with as it's intrinsically human. That's not to discredit or lessen the experiences of others. This is a generalized statement that applies to everyone. To what degree we each battle our negativities regarding our identity is where the real difference begins and what makes JJ stand out as a character. For the most part, the reveal that Jackie is a transgender woman is kept highly under wraps. The only smattering of hintings you can obtain is by collecting the donuts, which incidentally is where most of the story is hidden. By snagging every few or so donuts, a selection of texts between JJ and people she knows ranging from punk rocker Abby, wannabe YouTube star turned actor Philip, superfan Lily, and her Professor Goodman are doled out. Besides fleshing unseen characters out in a rather personal manner, as you learn to understand this extended cast without ever seeing them in the plot, they paint a clearer picture that supplements the main phone calls and texts between JJ, her mother in Emily. Humanized is probably the best term to go with, as none of the characters, not even JJ's mom, are overtly antagonistic. Instead of portraying the invisible as caricatures, as a lesser writer would have made Philip a one-trick loser or JJ's mom irredeemably evil, Swery embodies the core message given to the player at the beginning of The Missing. This game was made with the belief that nobody is wrong for being what they are. This is not to excuse their more dubious actions, particularly JJ's mom, but she's portrayed as realistic, which effectively makes her easier to understand and rebuff. For JJ, I can't speak on the topic of gender dysmorphia, as that has never been an issue I've suffered from. There is literally no room for me to talk on this subject. What I can express are the greater feelings of abnormality, the falsehood of normality. In civilizations old and new, we've always bred specific viewpoints on what is right and wrong. Now, there is categorization to this, as I'm pretty sure we can all agree that murder is bad, but when it starts delving into the more personal fronts is when you start uncovering the hypocritical nature to it. We start attributing certain lifestyles, sexual orientations, and matters that at the end of the day largely unaffect the whole as normal or abnormal. In turn, people who are subjected to this hanging caste system get persecuted, whether morally, fundamentally, or self-loathingly, for simply being themselves. What defines normal? How is it quantified? Who was in danger when Jackie realized that she was a woman? Absolutely no one, but because as a whole we consider this line of thinking an illness that needs to be cured with suppression, an unfair target was made out of her. Her own doubts were amplified, and soon Emily was dragged into the mix mentally. For JJ's dream journey, it was easier for her to make Emily the one with the sickness as a means of separation. It was a smokescreen by her psyche that toyed with what was normal. Only by accepting reality does JJ overcome her pain, the core concept of the gameplay. Instead of staying down when mutilated, JJ pushes forward because of Emily, akin to how even in the blackest of despair, one can find hope simply by moving forward. That connection to others is ultimately key. No one is ever truly alone. Our brains may like to bamboozle us, trying its damnedest to make us feel like beasts in human skin, but we are understanding to a fault. To tie this story to another one I relatively enjoy, JJ's revelation at the end reminds me a whole lot of Denji's at the end of Chainsaw Man. To sidestep spoilers, both come to grips with what they want from life, deciding that they aren't going to live theirs according to others, and that's what I think makes JJ a well-rounded character. Her epiphany can be taken to heart by anyone. Finding strength in the pit of misery, embracing love from those around you, going forward instead of back, accepting who you really are and striving to obtain that image. Life ultimately is a gift that can be hard to bear with. No two ones are the same, and it presents both positives and negatives in our path, but who's to say how you should handle yours, and the upsides almost always outweigh the downsides. What is fantastically grand about the idea of life is that it is inherently meaningless. You provide the context to it. Why do you think fake Emily posits such utter trite, describing life as only existing to have sex? On a biological level, you can make the argument that any creature exists to procreate, but that's cutting away mind and spirit out of the equation. We are not all the same, and what makes us who we are plays a heavy hand in determining our reasons to live, whether that be out of personal glory, a need to pass the torch, or love. The Missing is probably my go-to game when it comes to showcasing that Unity is not a terrible engine. It is all about how you get the program to work for you. While not a marvel by higher standards, what The Missing has is solid art direction and world building. JJ and Emily land this strangers in a strange land motif with both girls wearing anachronistic or fantastical clothing. It paints the medium with this dreamlike state as if to unconsciously hint towards the player that the experience you're puzzling through isn't within the realm of possibility. Just compare what JJ imagines herself to be within her final moments versus what she actually looks like in reality. As if to help prop up this idea, the locations JJ explores are steeped in real-world architecture, but have an air of mysticism included.
When things felt like they'd last forever, we were so young, so happy to believe, but those days.
Did you find what you were looking for?
So show
You better not lose it again.
a way to see how far from you I've been driven. Tell me that everything is okay and I forgive. Take me down those old cobbled streets where we used to meet. Maybe that way I can see the sun and the stars again.
You get the feeling that while there was a local population on the Island of Memories, many man-made works have slowly succumbed to the natural world the further out you go. Deliberately, the closer you go towards the heart of the place, the more that civilization starts taking predominance, such as with the case of the bowling alley and the clock tower. It matches up to JJ's mindset that the nearer she gets to her truth, the more the world starts losing its magical luster and returns to a grounded state. Or as cognizant one can get for this adventure. Helping to facilitate this is the general lack of music played during your exploration on the island. At most, you'll get the sounds of nature, which are pretty standard, but for many cases with me when it comes to sound design, hitting that level means that there is nothing outright wrong, and the missing does land the feel it's going for: a deserted isle. It's utterly simple to get invested into the world, seeing as it lets you venture into its bowels unimpeded, letting each little noise and sound guide you along the way. When the game does decide to use a soundtrack, the works of Kidlit, Yuji Takanuchi, and Keisuke Morita employ a solid range, from upbeat techno and jazz for setting the scene within the bar and bowling alley to the prominent ballad that is the eponymous track. Songs that really aim to hit you in the feels, accompanying the heavy themes that the game covers. Contrasting these softer harmonies are the terrible crunches and screams from JJ. The missing doesn't pull any punches and could be mistakenly taken for Riona if it weren't for the fact that selling the game as fetish bait wasn't Swery's point. While used to the untold suffering of fictional characters, Hello Saya and Manhunt, that's not to say that the cries of pain that JJ regularly huffs out didn't affect me. The fact that you have to put her in harm's way makes each protracted yelp carry a sense of guilt. For an even greater touch, when injured, JJ has different tones for speaking lines to get across how much pain she is in. To reverberate this concept, the game has an acute detail to animations, comes with the territory for a cinematic platformer a la Prince of Persia or Zorro, and like with those games that laid the foundation, JJ follows their road plan with added flair. Sure, each nasty wound will have limbs flying off or JJ's body crumpled or burned, but her reactions to certain text messages are where it's at. Nothing like seeing her grumpily walk after cussing out FK. One of the biggest highlights of the presentation is the UI, more specifically the phone and its collection of stickers and avatars for each of JJ's contacts. Swery and his team could have been basic here, but they went the full 9 yards by designing character analogs in the shape of Sleepy and his donuts, the clown, and the squirrel to add an extra layer of deviation for everyone. It adds personality to blank faces where you can imagine the type of person who would use such stickers, some of which, like the donuts saying what the fuck, are so offhandedly funny to see without prior knowledge. Perhaps the only letdown is the voice acting, mainly for JJ, as both Kelly Hallway and Steve Wiley come across as stilted and unconfident with the material. On the other hand, JJ embodies a brand of nervous energy that makes both voices fit. This is an aspect you have to play by chest and scene, as when JJ goes for unshakable during the final moments, the reads fall flat. It is also here you could take a jab at the reliance of Twin Peaks vocal effects, but that's an issue of self-indulgence, and I don't mind.
I won't lose again. I'm ready to accept myself now. My mind is so clear as a crisp spring morning. Lightning keeps striking. But where? If I use that...
Don't move just yet. What do you see?
A deer.
Good. You're gonna be okay, but we're gonna give you a bit more blood just in case. Oh, that's right. Let me show you the little guy who saved you. He's the one who stopped your bleeding.
FK. Mom. Yeah, I'm fine. I don't know how to say it. Huh? Stop crying, or I won't be able to understand you. Yeah. I love you too.
JJ!
Emily.
You idiot!
Emily, that hurts.
Shut up! I was worried to death! I thought you were gone forever.
Emily, I had a strange dream. You were in it too.
A bad dream?
Yeah. But I needed it. It helped me find what I was looking for. Emily, thank you for always supporting me. I think I finally understand who I am now. I'll never leave you again.
JJ! Me neither.
Emily, I told you. That hurts.
Shut up! No more talking.
The Missing J.J. Macfield and the Island of Lost Memories is a 2.5D puzzle platformer with an emphasis on self-harm as the solution. Make no mistake, J.J. Macfield will need to take full advantage of her near invincibility to reunite with Emily, as each obstacle blocking her off from her beloved always involves the need for mutilation. While controlling relatively basic for this type of game, if a tad slowly and heavily, as this is more Prince than Plumber, what unites JJ is her relationship with pain. Damage affects JJ in a few ways, they being dismemberment, shattered, or burned. Dismemberment is the typical reaction to stepping on sharp objects or receiving a hit from the hair shrieker, wind-up babies, or owls. While what limb gets taken off is location-based for certain hazards, losing them can drastically change JJ. Anything severed can be used as a counterbalance, weight, or projectile, but sliced off legs hamper JJ to a crawl with enough scarring leaving her a head. Sometimes it is necessary to have less body mass to fit through spaces. Running back a bit, JJ does die when wounded as a head from any source or by falling into grabby hands, but checkpoints most of the time are generous and dying isn't a relative issue. Shattered, meanwhile, occurs when hit by swinging objects or the monkeys, flipping world orientation upside down to provide access to newer areas or move objects into place. Though hurting JJ is a step in each dilemma, sometimes switches need to be pulled or rotated, boxes moved, or latches attached. Rounding out the injury types is burned. Outside of making a light source out of JJ and allowing her to burn roots away, she suffers from decreased durability to a huge degree that a simple drop from a ledge will incur limb loss. Water sources within an area can also put JJ out. Whenever the need arises, you can regenerate JJ back to full health, though doing so will undo the states of shattered and burned. Enemies in JJ are few and far between. Most you'll get are movable hazards that can be bounced on for increased height, stationary fans that strip you down to a head, the babies that do the same, the monkeys that inflict shattered, and sometimes the entity known as the hair shrieker will chase you through a section. Basically, don't stop moving, and even if you do get hit, just regenerate. What will take up most of your time with the missing is locating all the donuts, split into two categories, free floaters and the sleepies. Collecting enough donuts awards text messages between JJ and her associates, which I highly recommend you seek out as most of the story is told for them, alongside costumes and concept art. To alleviate wondering which donuts have been snacked on or not, the game makes already picked up donuts see-through to alert that you've already had your fill of those ones. Same goes for the sleepies, which display a close sign when they've been interacted with. Donuts are certainly hidden in hard to reach or secret spaces, though some are either outright given to you or need the usage of a thrown item to knock down. If you ever worry about missing a donut, there's a handy chapter select on the main menu and a chapter retry from the pause screen. Finishing your first round unlocks New Game Plus, adding extra text messages between JJ and FK for a better understanding of the background events, and you can play as male JJ as well. Much of what will get you to like J.J. Macfield is the neat puzzles partnered with solid character writing and interactions, this latter aspect the basis for practically all of Swery's games. Very rarely in the game was I stumped when it came to a puzzle, which to me states that whoever designed them thought of logical solutions. Some of my favorite ones focus on the need for using body parts as ballasts or replacements for items. Two set pieces that come to mind are the final grave during the church and the entire sawmill. Escaping the church sees you introduced to the burial mechanic where corpse parts need to be properly placed in the ground, while for most you just have to drag the whole cadaver to shove it into the hole or find a leftover part and drop it in. The final body is cut into sections with the legs weighing down a pair of pulley platforms. By using the boxes also in the area, can you manipulate the two pads so that the body can be returned back to the soil. Again, while not a difficult puzzle, I do like how it centers on the physicality of the world. Same goes for the sawmill. Despite operating as a simple fetch quest, the wrinkle of there not being enough bricks to unlock the dolly gets you to think outside the box by applying JJ's state of existence as the answer. Only a tangible item needs to be offered. The dolly doesn't discriminate between brick or body. Perhaps my favorite puzzle in the game is the midway point within the clock tower. By reintroducing pendulums and adding saws, the clock tower is all about mobility and how JJ reacts to sources of injury. Swinging objects always launch JJ violently horizontal, while saws do it in the direction they're spinning. Add the two together and you create a platforming and timing challenge that is cool to pull off. Transitioning away from the gameplay, man, I love a lot of the characters in The Missing. One thing Swery gets right is either writing his cast to be personable to a T or interestingly offbeat. Both are the case of this game. You really get a feel for each of JJ's contacts and their priorities in life, such as Philip's carefree attitude that takes life in the moment, to Goodman's mentorly approach that bellies a deep love of product design and nerd culture. Movie buff Swery once again drops references, this time to Star Wars in one of the funniest pieces of dialogue, as Goodman states that he's going to Comic-Con as Boba Fett by taking advantage of his sick days. If there's one takeaway from The Missing is that it wants you to recognize people as people. We all have our own worries, beliefs, weaknesses, and strengths. It's amazing to me how Swery can include such a hardline twist within the game and not only A, not botch a controversial topic, and B, make it relatable to anyone. Deciding to write JJ as a trans woman was a heavy risk on a slew of fronts. You're inviting people to mock you if you don't stick the landing. To me, Swery does purely because JJ is presented as a person first. Under that mindset, do a lot of her issues become understandable and relatable. Measuring up to mounting pressure, struggling to come to terms with who you are, worrying that people will bully or hate you on merit alone for superficial reasons are legitimate fears we all can suffer from. By refracting these ideas off JJ, do we form that personal attachment to her and see her variations of them. At the end of the day, we're all dealing with our own troubles, our friends and dreams, the motivation we need to tackle life head on. While there isn't a lot wrong to find within the game, two sections in particular can be a bit of a nuisance. The battle against Emily as the Hair Shrieker and the final chase. For the former, you're never explicitly told the controls or what you can do in the antagonistic role. The use key performs the suction attack, which is only one half the equation when absorbing Emily. You have to stun her first to drag her into the maw. The pertinent side of your capabilities lies in the ground pound, which is done by holding up and letting go. While The Missing is generally good with signposting, such as with the QTEs or how specific injuries affect the world, not providing an inkling on how the monster operates seems decidedly forgetful. At least there's no failure state, and once you solve the missing variable, sucking up Emily is as easy as pie. As you quantify that mathematical pun, escaping the Hair Shrieker by all accounts is dull. Besides some time-based puzzles maybe materializing to block your path, the Hair Shrieker is a knife with no edge. Getting hit by it always provides JJ enough time to regenerate as it backs off. Symbolically, the stunt double for Sadako hits the nail on the head, but to say I was scared by its multitude of appearances gameplay-wise is an out-and-out lie. That is, of course, not accounting for the final chase where precognition hampers a somewhat engaging sequence. If you don't know what path you have to follow, as it is strict enough to not allow for many errors, be prepared to respawn at the starting/midway point for a small mistake. Under duress is when JJ's deliberate movement scheme can give you a bit of trouble as she suffers from supreme stickiness. For the most part, this momentum or lack thereof fits with the slower Prince of Persia style platforming, but in those rare instances of speed, JJ's sluggishness draws attention towards itself like a loudmouth snail in the left lane. Coupled with this is how handsy or not she can be with ledges at times. One of the hardest jumps in The Missing is right near the end of the approach towards the clock tower, solely because of the spacing you have to judge off a rope swing jump. JJ's adherence towards momentum makes this jump quite tricky, as the exact moment you have to hop off is precise lest you bump your head and lose any propulsion that the swinging wire gives you. On the puzzle front, the cutouts in the bowling alley are too esoteric for their own good. It's based on pose association, which is hit or miss. As for the pilot, you can tell he's mimicking a football player, but the others, including the shoe, don't ring the synapses so easily. Lastly, whether this is isolated to the PC version or not, The Missing is a slightly glitchy game. Those familiar with Swery's work know his games are held with duct tape and hope, so don't expect a perfect diamond. My favorite one is during the final chase, where if you pause after jumping on the flaming statue, it will fall even though it should be scripted not to. JJ Macfield bears the makings of a Swery 65 game. For those in the know, that is already an immediate telling to you to pick it up. For people not gifted with the experience of a Swery game, it's probably his easiest entry to jam with. Solid puzzle design, acting across some great character writing, and a complex theme handled with heart makes the Island of Memories a worthwhile vacation destination. I'm a bit sorry for how long this video took to make. Originally written here was a celebration of me getting a new job, but turns out due to reasons I won't explain, it wasn't the right fit for me. It honestly stings, but that's how the dice have fallen for me. Rolling with the punches is a trait that I've learned the hard way, to the point that I make Dempsey look proud. This showing of The Missing JJ Macfield in the Island of Memories is over, but stay tuned for our next feature involving a single dad looking for his daughter, a malfunctioning radio, and the near perfectioning of a genre.